Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will look at nonlinear equations. So, nonlinear equations have the pronumeral, in this case x, has a power other than 1. So here the power is 2. In something like this, 3 minus x square root, remember that square root is the power of a half. So this is actually like x raised to the power of a half. So in each of these equations, the power of x is not 1. The idea here is with nonlinear equations, unlike the linear equations we've been studying, you can't solve them just using the 4 operations. You need to use other operations. So when we're solving this here, we're going to solve it like a linear equation. We're going to undo what's been done to x. So BIDMAS dictates that x is squared first. It goes brackets I for index, which means raising to a power, then all the rest. So x has been squared, then times by 4, then subtracted 1 to get 35. So we're going to undo first subtracting 1 by adding 1. So I get 4x squared equals 36. So the way we undo timesing by 4 is to divide each side by 4. So if I divide left-hand side by 4, I must divide the right-hand side by 4. So then I'm going to be left with x squared equals 9. So be careful here, because a lot of people, if they say x squared equals 9, they'll just write, yep, cool, x equals 3. There are actually 2 solutions to this equation. See, yes, you can get 1 by square rooting each side. So x equals 3 is a solution, but there is also the other solution of negative 3. You have to be careful when you have squareds, or in fact even powers here, that the answer could be positive or negative. So we just write it like this. X could be negative 3 or positive 3. So similarly, when we're solving this one, we're going to times each side by 3. 2x squared equals 12. Divide each side by 2. We get x squared equals 6. Now 6 is not a perfect square. What number do you square to get 6? Well, you just square root 6 and also negative root 6. So even though the square root of 6 has only one solution, x squared equals 6 has 2 solutions. When you have x squared equals a positive number, there will always be 2 solutions, one positive, one negative. We'll just leave the solutions like this in exact form. So what about this one here? Square root of 3 minus x equals 2. Well, it's nonlinear. We can't just use the 4 operations. What we can do is square each side. See, if you square this, it just undoes square rooting. Squares and square roots undo each other in exactly the same way as multiplication and division. So on the left-hand side, I'm just left with 3 minus x. On the right-hand side, if I squared the left-hand side, I must square the right-hand side. I get 3 minus x equals 4, and you know how to solve that. You can probably see straight away the answer has to be negative 1. Right, so let's look at this one here. So remember, we have to do things in the opposite order to BIDMAS. So here, x has been multiplied by negative 3 first, then 18 is added, then the square root, because we're square rooting the whole thing after we've done that. Then we've stuck a negative in the front, and then we have added 6. This is a positive 6. So the first thing I must do is undo adding 6 by subtracting 6 from each side. So subtract 6 from the left-hand side, I must also subtract it from the right-hand side. I get negative square root of 18 minus 3x equals negative 5. Okay, now I can change the sign of the left-hand side as long as I do the same to the right-hand side. So I can change this to a positive as long as I change this to a positive. So I've got square root of 18 minus 3x equals 5. Let's now square both sides. So squaring the left-hand side gives me that. Squaring the right-hand side, 5 squared is 25. Subtract 18 from both sides. And then divide each side by negative 3. I get x equals negative 7 over 3, and I'm done. Don't think just because you didn't get a whole number answer that you must be wrong. So note, whenever you square root something, the answer is always positive. You can't have, for example, square root of x equals -3. That doesn't work. It is a bit confusing, I know. The square root of 4 has only one solution, which is 2. But if you have x squared equals 4, it has two solutions, 2 and -2. All right, let's now look at some nonlinear equations involving the null factor law. So I put in these kind of questions because you will have to do them a lot later on when you do quadratic equations. So to solve these, we're going to use the null factor law. So the null factor law says if AB equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. What that is saying is if you have something times something equals 0, either the first something has to be 0 or the second something has to be 0. We can use it to solve equations like this. So here we have something times something equals 0. So either the first something equals 0, well, if x minus 3 equals 0, just add 3 to both sides. Or the second something equals 0. So 4 minus x equals 0, x would just be 4. So this is an equation that has two solutions. It's actually a quadratic equation. The reason it's nonlinear is if you were to expand this, you would get a quadratic. You would get something with an x squared term. But we're not going to go through how to solve them when they're expanded, just when they're factorized like this. So something times something equals 0, either first something equals 0 or second something equals 0. Exactly the same as what you do here. Here we have something times something equals 0. So either the first something equals 0, if 3x equals 0, of course x must be 0. Either the first something equals 0 or the second thing being multiplied equals 0. And if 2x plus 5 equals 0, you simply subtract 5 from both sides, then divide by 2. So this again has two solutions. One solution is x equals 0, the other solution is x is -5 over 2 or -2.5. So how could we use the null factor law for something like this? Well, there are two ways we could do it. We could subtract 9x from both sides and then factorize. So the highest common factor of these two is 3x. What do you times by 3x to get 6x squared? Well, that's 2x. What do you times by 3x to get -9? Well, that's -3. So now we have something times something equals 0. So we must have either the first thing equals 0, which would mean x equals 0, or the second thing equals 0. Now if 2x minus 3 equals 0, just add 3, divide by 2, you get x is 3 over 2. They are the two solutions. Turns out when you have an x squared, you generally get two solutions, as we saw in the previous slide. If you have x squared equals 4, you get x is 2, x equals -2 as your two solutions. So that's one way to do it. It involved factorizing. Another way to do it is you can go like this. So if you have 6x squared equals 9x, you might divide each side by x. So dividing each side by x. Now the thing is here, you can't divide by 0. So you have to look at two cases where x equals 0 or x does not equal 0. So if x equals 0, you can't divide each side. So one of our solutions is x equals 0. Clearly, 0 equals 0 is a true statement. So that's one solution. Now the other solution comes, if I divide 6x squared by x, then I get just 6x. 9x divided by x is 9. Divide each side by 6. 9 divided by 6 is 3 over 2. Notice here I got the two same solutions, 0 and 3 over 2. You can do it either way, subtracting and then factorizing, or you can divide each side by x. Just note, when you are dividing by something that involves a pronumeral, you have to make an allowance for that something being 0, because if you divide each side by 0, it causes all sorts of problems. So we divided by x, we have to make an allowance for x equals 0. We had to check whether x equals 0 was a valid solution, which it was. Alright, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.